How you doing there? Welcome back to Babel on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Memvav, Daf 46 of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Friends. Yo, friends. Today, okay, we are just continuing to discuss. I don't think we're getting up to the next Mishnah quite yet. I think that's tomorrow. But today we are continuing to discuss mountains, right? If an Oved Kochavim worships a mountain. So we said that the mountain is not going to be Avodah Zarah. The mountain is not going to be Avodah Zarah. So we kind of riff on that, go a little bit deeper. What happens about stones that get separated from a mountain? When we say that a mountain is not Avodah Zarah, can the stones be used to build the Mizbeach in the Beis HaMikdash? Right? If it's mutter, it's mutter, or maybe not. So we're kind of going a bit deeper, digging deeper, quarrying, maybe you could say, a bit deeper. We are quarrying deeper into the mountain today. Today we are quarrying deeper into the mountain. Alrighty, we are going to begin on Daf Memvav Amid Aleph, about somewhere between 5 and 10 lines, I'd say, into Daf Memvav Amid Aleph. The fourth word on the line is Tani Tana Kame de Rab Sheshes. A Tana, a teacher of Brises, taught before Rav Sheshes. Ha'akum ha'ovdim es ha'horim ves ha'gvos. So when an Oved Kochavim worships mountains and hills, hein mutarin, so as we learned yesterday, the mountains and hills will be permitted, they will not become Avodah Zarah. However, v'ovdeim b'saif, but etzen, for the fact that this Oved Kochavim did Avodas Kochavim, of course, is one of the Shev Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. And as we learned in Masechta Sanhedrin, the punishment for violation of the Shev Mitzvahs B'nai Noach is slicing off of the head. Sounds like somebody outside is making a lot of noise. What the heck are they making a lot of noise about? I guess why not, right? Oh, that's a dog. I guess if I was a dog, maybe I'd make a lot of noise. Like, why not? What else am I going to do? Anyways, whatever. No, I guess dogs have plenty of stuff to do. But if they're bored, they may as well make... Okay, whatever. I don't know. I don't know what there's a park. Okay, let's go fight. Okay, forget about it. Okay, I don't know what I would do if I was a dog. All right. Now, where were we? What happened was the dog heard that we were learning and obviously got excited. I don't blame the dog. So now, etzem, the fact that this Oved Kochavim was Oved Kochaviming, so he's chayev misa, chayev saif, even though he failed. He failed to Oved Kochavim because he Oved Kochavim'd a mountain that can't be Oved Kochavim'd, but he's chayev misa for that. Okay. Now, ve'es hazroim ve'es hayirokis. All right. What if he worships plants and different kinds of plants and vegetables? Oh, which reminds me. Update. Paris of Eretz Yisrael update. We are, I'd say, midsummer here in Eretz Yisrael. The watermelons are still amazing. I got a watermelon today. It's Friday. It's Erev Shabbos. I got a watermelon. I wonder if maybe it's starting to be a little bit past peak, or maybe mamish like at the peak. I want peak. I wonder if like the Avatiach season is starting to end. So Cheva, I encourage everybody to come to Eretz Yisrael this week. Come to Eretz Yisrael this week. I imagine by the time you're hearing this daf, it's probably maybe right after Tisha B'Av, probably around Tisha B'Av. Come right after Tisha B'Av. Come to Eretz Yisrael. Go to Shuk Machne Yehuda. Buy yourselves an Avatiach. They're going out of season. Cheva, I bought today that plums in Shuk Machne Yehuda. I bought plums. I bought some purple plums. They were delicious. But they also had yellow plums. Oh my gosh, knocked my socks off. I bought 2 purple plums and 2 yellow plums. I ate both of the yellow plums immediately. I ran back to the Shuk Machne Yehuda and bought 8 more of them. Cheva, you don't know what you're missing over here. Come to Eretz Yisrael. Come for a few hours. Go to Shuk Machne Yehuda, buy a few fruits and go back. Do yourself a favor. Akoponim. So where were we? So And if somebody worships plants, seeds, well, things that were planted, I reckon, vegetables, hein asurim. Interesting. So they are asurim. Okay. And again, whoever worshipped them is chayv misa, is chayv saif. Now, I assume that they were not Jewish. If they were Jewish, that would probably be skila. Anyways, so now we, of course, are thinking back to yesterday and saying, wait, so we have these plants, right? What was the phrase? When you plant something and then end up worshiping it, are you chayv? Aren't you chayv? So says the Gemara, so Rav Sheshes says to this teacher of Brises, who says this? Whose opinion is this, that by the plants and the vegetables that they will be osir? Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, it's Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. The Amar Ilan Shenital V'Sof Avdo osir, who says that a plant that was planted not as a Avodah Zarah, just as a plant, and was later worshipped is osir. So the Brisa is saying that when it comes to plants and when it comes to vegetables, when they're worshipped, so they are osir. So that is Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda, who says that a plant that is planted with no intention of Avodah Zarah and was later worshipped is taka osir. V'lukma be'ilon, or actually the Bago Sabach changed it to bizroim shezaron mitchila lechach v'rabanan. Why do you have to assume that it's talking about nitao levasof avdo? Why do you have to say it's talking about that they were planted initially not for Avodah Zarah, and therefore it's dafka the opinion of Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda who says asur? Why can't you say that it was initially planted as Avodah Zarah and therefore could even be according to the Rabbanon? So lo sakadaitech. No, I'll tell you why. The katani dumya dehai, because the Brisa lists two things: a mountain and these plants. So therefore, the plants are similar to the mountain. Mahar sheloinito mitchila lechach. So just like by the mountain was not initially planted, so to speak, was not created for Avodah Zarah. So avhai nami sheloinito mitchila lechach. So also we're talking about plants that were not initially planted as Avodah Zarah. They were initially planted just as plants, and only later on they are worshipped as Avodah Zarah. And in that scenario, we're saying it's also, therefore it must be like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. So now we get to the question of, if there are stones that on their own got disconnected from the mountain. So of course we said that the mountain itself is mutter. If the mountain itself is worshipped, it is mutter. There's no tfisa sidei adam. It's mutter. It's connected to the ground. There's no tfisa sidei adam. It's mutter. Now, what happens if stones get disconnected from the mountain on their own? Because if somebody disconnected them, then that could be then there's tfisa sidei adam. But we're talking about stones that got disconnected on their own from the mountain, and then they were worshipped. Are they mutter or are they osir? So, itvar was stated, avnei har shenidaldalu, stones from a mountain that got disconnected, dislodged, disconnected on their own from the mountain. Bnei Reb Chia, the children of Reb Chia, Rashi points out that they are Yehuda and Chizkiah. I wonder, is Chizkiah the son of Reb Chia? Is that like Chizkiah? Like the Rebbe of Reb Yochanan? Like was it Amar Reb Yochanan, Amar Chizkiah? Whatever, or Machlekes Chizkiah and Reb Yochanan? Is that talking about Reb Chia's son Chizkiah? Quite possibly. Could very well be, I think. I don't see why not. So Bnei Reb Chia of Reb Yochanan, Chad Omer Asuris v'Chad Omer Mutaris. Oh, okay. So one opinion is that these stones that got disconnected on their own from the mountain, one opinion is that they are asuris. The other opinion is that they are mutaris. One opinion is they are not allowed. The other opinion is that they are allowed. My time the mutaris. What would be the explanation for the opinion who says that they are permitted? That even though they've been worshipped, they are permitted. They are not forbidden. Kihar, well, the reason is, it's like the mountain itself that they got disconnected from. Mahar she'ein bo tfisa sidei adam u'mutar. Well, a mountain is something that has no interference, maybe you could say. Let's say that no involvement of the, maybe involvement is better even than interference. Right? Just like a mountain has no involvement of human hands, it just kind of exists. It was created with the world. Umutter, and the mountain is permitted. Hane, also these stones that got disconnected from the mountain on their own and has never had any human hands involved. They have no human hand involvement, and therefore, like the mountain, they are permitted. But frag the Gemara, wait a second, you can't compare the stones that got disconnected and the mountain itself. Malahar shekain mechuber. The mountain is connected to the earth. These stones have been disconnected from the earth. They're different. Therefore, even though the mountain is permitted, perhaps these stones should not be. Well, here is the thing. If an animal is worshipped, it is permitted, at least permitted for just regular people. To bring as a korban is a different story. Of course, ne'evad is usher as a korban. But for regular people to eat, I imagine, it is permitted. So here you have an animal. Now, an animal is something that there's no human involvement. I mean, the animals make their own babies. And that's how animals are made, apparently. So animals are disconnected from the earth. They're not attached to the earth. They have no human involvement in their creation. And when they are worshipped, they are permitted, at least for regular people. So there you have it. So if your issue, or some people I think say issue, if your issue with these stones is that they are disconnected from the ground, well, guess what? Animals are disconnected from the ground and there's no human involvement. And when they are worshipped, they are permitted. But we have issues with using animals as an example. How come? An animal is a living thing. And what does Rashi say? Rashi says, it says, wait, what is this? It says, exactly. So then, right? That when it comes to an animal, I think maybe that actually wasn't what I was looking for. But anyways, I think Rashi says somewhere that it's like choshev because it's alive. But anyways, so we're saying that animals are unique in that they are alive while stones are not. So meaning if we want to say, well, animals are permitted when they're worshipped and they're not connected to the ground, therefore these stones should be permitted, but the animals are alive, and I think possibly I saw somewhere that, and therefore they're important, they're chashuv, that is why they don't become Avodah Zarah. But these stones are not alive. Okay, so if you're looking for something that's not alive, well then why don't we learn it out from the mountain, which is not alive and is mutter, v'chazar din. But then we go in a circle, an infinite loop. Because you say, yeah, but the mountain is connected to the earth, whereas these stones are not. The nature of this is not like the nature of that. Is there right? And the nature of that is unlike the nature of this. Meaning, look, let's go right there for a second. It's a classic thing. The common denominator between the mountain and the animal is that there is no human involvement and they are mutter after having been worshipped. So meaning you can look at the mountain and say, yeah, but it's connected to the. You can look at the animal and say, yeah, but it's alive. So okay, so the mountain has its issue. The animal has its issue. But the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, these are examples of things that have no tfisas yidei adam, things that have no human involvement in their existence. And when they are worshipped, they are permitted. Afkol she'ein bo tfisas yidei adam umuter. So also, I will include anything that has no human involvement. If they are worshipped, they should be permitted. For example, these stones that got disconnected from the mountain on their own should be permitted after having been worshipped. But the Gemara digs in. Malatzara shove sheboin shekein lo nishtanu mibir yoson. But still, these stones are different than the mountain and the animal, and that is because the mountain and the animal never changed. The mountain was created the way it was created, and it has remained that way. The animal was created the way it was created, and it has remained its own way. Whereas these stones have changed. They were initially part of the mountain, and now they're on their own. A change happened to them. And therefore I could say that, therefore, the mountain and the animal and the animals are in their own unique category as things that have never been changed. And these stones that we're talking about are different than that, and therefore we can't assume that they are mutter like the mountain and the animals are. So which the Gemara says, okay, fine. So let's learn it out from an animal that has a mum and a mountain. So there. Because an animal that has a mum, when it's worshipped, it remains mutter, and it has no involvement of human hands, and also it has changed. It was born without this blemish, and it is now permanently blemished. A change took place to it, and still, if it is worshipped, it is permitted. So I will say also that these stones that have had no human involvement and have never and have undergone a change, just like these animals that have a mum have undergone a change, these stones are permitted as well. Alternatively, another way that we could learn it out is that maybe the animal is unblemished and completely healthy, but maybe we're talking about a tree that has gotten dried out. Right? So, let's say according to the Chachamim, who say Natul Vasof Avzo is mutter. So if you have a tree that has gotten dried out and therefore has undergone a change, and if it's worship, it will still be mutter, right? If you say Nito Vasof Avdo is mutter, so you have this tree that was planted just as a regular tree, and then it got all dried out, it underwent a change. If that tree is worship, it will still be mutter, and therefore let's say, right, there's no tfisas yidei adam there, right? According to the Chachamim, right, they say that the fact that it was planted is insignificant. It's not considered tfisas yidei adam, and if it is worshipped, it is mutter, and therefore I will say that these stones as well, if they are worshipped, they remain mutter. Uman de osar. And according to the opinion who says that these stones that disconnected on their own from the mountain are osir, the reason is because l'hachi ksiv shaketz tishaktzenu v'soiv tisavenu. Well, that's exactly why the pasuk, the verse, used such strong language like shaketz tishaktzenu, make it like disgusting abomination, these little disgusting creatures and stuff, v'soiv tisavenu, and abominationize it. That's pretty strong language. That even though you could make an argument to say that it's permitted, and you bring the tzad hashava to say the mountains and the animals and the stones should be permitted, I hear you. I understand why you would say that these stones that got separated from the mountain on their own should be permitted. But at the end of the day, the pasuk says, Shakitz tishaktzenu v'soiv tisavenu, don't go near it. And therefore, these stones that got disconnected from the mountain are usher according to that point of view, right? There's one opinion that says mutter, like we talked about, the tzad hashove, and there's other opinion that says usher because of shaketz tishaktzenu v'soiv tisabenu. So now the Gemara is trying to figure out whose opinion is the one that says, I don't remember. Okay, so let's say that it's we had this machlokas between Bnei Reb Chia and Reb Yochanan. One opinion, right, regarding these stones that got disconnected from the mountain. One opinion was that they are mutter. One opinion was that they're usher. And we're trying to figure out, maybe we could figure out who's the one that says mutter, who's the one that says usher. So the Gemara suggests that perhaps the Bnei Reb Chia are the ones who say mutter. How come? Tistayim the Bnei Reb Chia d'shar. Let us conclude that it is the sons of Reb Chia who say that these stones are permitted. How come? The boy Chizkiah, because Chizkiah asked. Now, as I pointed out earlier, as Rashi says, Chizkiah was one of the children of Reb Chia. Okay, so therefore we have this. So Chizkiah had asked. Chizkiah was one of the Bnei Reb Chia. So if we could understand his position, so we can understand. Let's see if we can understand from what Chizkiah says. See if we can understand that he would say that these stones are permitted. Zakav beyo. The boy Chizkiah zakav beyo l'ishtachvos lamau. Oh. So if a person takes an egg, I taka need to buy more eggs. I have 2 left. Okay. So if a person takes an egg and stands it up with the intention of then prostrating himself to the egg, to worshiping the egg. Okay. All right. That's his thing. Anyways, so Reb Chia asks, if one stands up an egg, I don't know exactly what that means. I mean, I assume it just means take an egg and make it upright somehow. And then prostrates oneself. Well, it says in order to, right? Zakabeya, a person stood up an egg, in order to bow down to it. Ma'u, what is the status of the egg? Is the egg usher or is the egg mutter? And the assumption for now is that he stood up the egg and then actually, right, he stood it up to bow down to it and actually bowed down to it. So we wanna make the argument and say that why was it important that he had to stand up the egg first? Because you need tfisas yidei adam. Because you need human involvement. So therefore, we're saying that by standing up the egg, you had the human involvement, and then he prostrates himself before the egg is now osir. So the key being that it's also because there was human involvement, and therefore by these stones that got disconnected from the mountain where there was no human involvement, they should be mutter. That is the line of reasoning that the Gemara is lining at the moment. So the boy Chizkiah asks, Zoka beyo l'shtachva la, a person stood up an egg in order to prostrate himself before it. Ma'u, what is the halacha? Is the egg mutter or osir? Now we are assuming right now that when it says that he stood up the egg in order to bow down to it, and he then actually did bow down to it, and he's asking, has kifto have a maise, ilo have a maise. And we're trying to figure out, is standing up an egg considered a maise or not? Is it considered human involvement? Lo, right? So that was the kasha of Reb Chia, of Chizkiah, the Bnei Reb Chia, of Chizkiah. He wanted to know, is standing up an egg enough of a maise that this egg should be osir? Aval, however, lo zakaf, lo mitzvah. But if he did it, certainly if he didn't do anything to the egg, just let it kind of lie there, certainly it would not be osir. It would be mutter because there was never any tfisas yedei adam. Shma'mina b'nei Reb Chia d'shar. So we see that it's the b'nei Reb Chia who require tfisas yedei adam, and therefore since these stones that got disconnected from the mountain on their own don't have tfisas yedei adam, they are mutter. Lo, no. Le'olam emalach, I will say to you, b'nei Reb Chia, de asrei v'shtach, where am I? So le'olam emalach, b'nei Reb Chia de asrei, no. I will argue the opposite, that the b'nei Reb Chia are the ones who say, osir. That the b'nei Reb Chia are the ones who say that these stones are osir. If one bows down to the stones that got disconnected from the mountain, osir. Osir. No action is required. We don't require tfisas yedei adam. And even though these stones had no tfisas yedei adam, who cares? If one prostrates oneself before them, they're osir. So then what was Chizkiah asking with the standing up of the egg if you don't need any kind of human involvement? And if he were to have prostrated himself before this egg, even without standing the egg up, it would be osir. And here, what are we talking about in Chizkiah's question about the egg? Reb Chia's question is, and I'm going to reiterate, if he would have bowed down to the egg without doing anything to the egg would have been osir. And also the stones that we're talking about that got separated from the mountain, that nobody did anything to them, if somebody bows down to them, they are also osir. What we're talking about in Chizkiah's question is a scenario where somebody stood up this egg in order to bow down to it, but never did bow down to it. Uliman, and the question is, who are we asking about? Because it should actually be pretty straightforward. Ilaman do Amar avodas kochavim shel Yisrael asur miyad. Well then, asura. Look, if his opinion is that the Avodah Zarah, that when a yid has Avodah Zarah, it's immediately asur. He doesn't need to worship it in order for it to be asur. It's immediately asur. Well then, asura, right? Once he stands up this egg to bow down to it, even though he didn't yet bow down to it, who cares? He's indicating that this egg is Avodah Zarah. It's immediately Avodah Zarah. So what's his question? And Ilaman de Omar ad shetiyavid alo palchale. And if he's of the opinion that in order for it to be asur, it must actually be worshipped, well, in this case, it wasn't worshipped. So it should be pretty clear, right? You have a guy who stood up this egg in order to bow down to it. He never did bow down to it. Well, if your opinion is that making something Avodah Zarah is enough, well, he made it Avodah Zarah when he showed his indication to make it his indication, his motivation. I don't know. But when he stood it up in order to be Avodah Zarah, he made it Avodah Zarah. It's also, if you say they would have to worship it, well, he didn't yet worship it. So it's not Avodah Zarah. So it's pretty clear cut. What is Reb Chia's question? Lo tzricha kigon shezokav beya le'ishtachavos lo. The question, okay. So the question is, well, what if he stood up this egg in order to bow down to it? And he didn't actually bow down to it. And then an Oved Kochavim came and bowed down to it. So now here's the thing, Chaver, here's the thing. You want to know what the thing is? Here it is. As I mentioned earlier, I have eggs in my refrigerator. Do you refrigerate your eggs or not? Mine are in the refrigerator. If an Oved Kochavim comes and bows down to my eggs are mutter. They're my eggs. They're not his eggs. You can't make my eggs. You can't just bow down to my eggs and now my eggs are usher. So what happened was, this yid stood up these eggs in order to bow down to them, but didn't actually bow down to them. And now an Oved Kochavim came and bowed down to them. So now if you're of the opinion that they are not usher, if you are of the opinion that it only becomes usher, that Avodah Zarah only becomes usher once it's actually worshipped. So in order for this egg to be usher, it would have to actually have been worshipped by the yid. So we're talking about a scenario where he stood up the egg in order to worship. So it's not that we need any kind of maisa, as we've said, Right? It's not that we need a ma'aseh. It's not that we need tfisas yidei adamo. No, we're saying the Bnei Reb Chia don't care about that. However, by standing up the egg, it could possibly be an indication that he intends to, right? He says he stood up the egg in order to bow down to it, but he didn't have an opportunity to actually bow down to it. Came at Ovid and then bowed down to it. So the question is, was the standing up the egg a significant indication that he intended to use this egg for Avodah Zarah, so that when the Ovid Kochavim then came and bowed down to it, it made the egg osir? If nobody would have bowed down to it, so to back up a tiny second, so meaning if the Yid would not have done anything to his eggs, right? Ovid Kochavim just came and opened up the refrigerator and bowed down to the eggs, so Ovid Kochavim can't make somebody else's eggs osir. But here we're talking about a scenario where he himself had actually already stood up the eggs in order to bow down to the eggs. He didn't yet actually bow down to them, and he would need to bow down to them in order for him to be osir. But then Ovid Kochavim came and bowed down to them. So the question is, are the eggs osir in this case or not? Again, lo tzricha, what we need it for is a situation, kigon shezaka beya lishtach beisla. The Yid stood up the egg in order to bow down to it. But he didn't bow down to it. But then Ovid Kochavim came and bowed down to it. Like Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, if a Yid stood up a brick, now a brick is something that is man-made, so it's something that can become Avodah Zarah. If a Yid stood up a brick in order to prostrate himself to it, but before he had a chance, and Ovid Kochavim bowed down to it, asura, the brick is asur. So what Chizkiah is asking is, do we say that, well, a brick is bigger than an egg, and therefore you can actually, it's easier to see when it is stood up, and maybe that's why it's also, but a egg is too small? Or maybe no, if you stand up the egg and then indicating that you intend to worship it, and then an Ovid Kochavim comes and bows down to it, maybe that would be also take, we say, let's go weiter. By Rami Bar Chome asks a kasha. Mishtach belahar avon of malam mizbeach. So Rami Bar Chome asks an interesting kasha. Who wants to explain Rami Bar Chome's kasha? Rami Bar Chome's kasha is that if somebody bows down to a mountain, so we had said that by bowing down to a mountain, the mountain is permitted. How permitted is that mountain, friends? How permitted is that mountain? Is it so permitted that we can quarry its stones and build the Mizbeach in the Beis HaMikdash with those with the stones from that mountain? Is that how permitted it is? Or maybe that's a different level. Maybe, okay, it's permitted to build your house with it, but the Mizbeach is a different story. After all, we know, for example, animals, right? As we talked about earlier, if you bow down to an animal, the animal is mutter for us, for regular people. But nevad, right? It's an animal that's been worshipped as Avodah Zarah. It can't be offered as a korban, right? There are the special levels when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash. So yesh nevad b'mechuber eitzel gavoya, or ein nevad b'mechuber eitzel gavoya. Do we say that just like by an animal, once it's been ne'evad, once it's been worshipped as Avodah Zarah, it can't be offered as a korban? So maybe we'll say the same thing over here by a mountain, that when a mountain is worshipped, it's permitted, but for use in the Beis HaMikdash, well, let's say as a korban, we'll read weiter in 1 second, that's a different level, and there would be ne'evad, it would be flagged, and those stones can't be used in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, even if you were to say that yes, there is a concept of ne'evad b'mechuber, by a mountain, eitzel gavoa, or by someone connected to the ground, eitzel gavoa, machshirei korban ke korban damo olo. But then there's question, the next question, which is, look, if I worship an animal, so even though that animal is mutter to adjotis, but to use that animal itself, to then slaughter that animal and offer that animal itself as a korban, okay, that's off limits. But here it's one step removed. These stones we're not offering the stones, we're just using them to enable the offering of to enable offerings, not offering the stones. We're using it to build an altar that by way of the altar, offerings will be offered, but we're not offering these stones. So we said, right, so do we treat the machshirei korban, the enablers of the offerings, like the offerings themselves? So even if you say that while the mountain itself is permitted, you can't offer the stones. The question is, we're not offering the stones. We're using it to build a mizbeach to enable offerings, but we're not offering the stones. So do we treat the enablers of the korbanos like the korbanos themselves? In which case they could be osir for being nevad, or do we say these stones, or the enablers of the korbanos, are a different thing, and these stones can be used for the mizbeach? So what's the dealio is the question. Okay, so again, for the top of Amud base, first of all, yesh nevad b'mechuber eitzel gavoya o ein nevad b'mechuber eitzel gavoya. Is there this status of ne'evad, like we have by an animal that is ne'evad, it can't be used as a korban? So is there the status of ne'evad b'mechuber, something is connected to the ground, in this case the mountain, eitzel gavoa, when it comes to God, or ein ne'evad b'mechuber eitzel gavoa, or there's no status of ne'evad when it comes to something connected to the ground, when it comes to the earth by Hashem? And timtze lomer yesh ne'evad b'mechuber eitzel gavoa, and even if you say yes, there is this status of ne'evad, but machshirei korban kekorban damud. But do we say that the enablers of the korban are like the korban themselves? Oh, lo, or maybe they're not like the korban themselves, and even though there's nevad, but it could be okay nonetheless to build the mizbeach. That's the shaila, friends. What do you say? Oh, my Ravid says, Ravid kavachom. Ravid says, well, I'll make a kavachomer. I will learn it out logically. And here's the logic from Esnan Zona. From Esnan Zona, a harlot's wage. A fellow goes to a harlot and pays a harlot, let's say, money. Can that money be donated to the Beis HaMikdash? The answer is, it cannot. Leisavi Esnan Zona Mechir Kelev Beis Hashem Elikecha. Do not bring a harlot's wage to the temple. So Amarav Kavachov, my Esnan Shimot or betalush lehedjit. Well, when it comes to Esnan Zona, when it comes to talush, let's say the money of, right, the money itself of the Esnan Zona, so a person pays a harlot for her services, and she then goes and buys a salad. She goes to the salad store and buys a salad. That's okay. And yet, osur b'mechuber legavoa. And yet, when it's something that is connected to the earth, it would be osur in the Beis HaMikdash. It would be osur in the Beis HaMikdash. Tichsiv, as the Bible says, lo savi esnan zono mechir kelev. Do not bring to the Beis HaMikdash esnan zono mechir kelev. Lo shna talush v'lo shna b'mechuber. And this esnan for the Beis HaMikdash, it doesn't matter if we're talking about money or if we're talking about a house, for example, right? Something that's connected to the ground, or something that's connected to the ground. So now it's important to point out, by the way, that the pasuk itself doesn't say loshna talush loshna v'mechuber. We're going to see that actually we're going to, right? That's an assumption that we're going to discuss. But anyways, Rave wants to say that if when it comes to Esnan Zona, now Esnan is more lenient than Avodah Zarah, right? Esnan Zona is permitted to buy salad with. However, something that is betalush, something that is disconnected, that was worshipped as Avodah Zarah, is osur ba'ana. So Esnan Zona is more lenient than ne'evad. And if we're saying that by Esnan Zona, which is permitted betalush when it's money, it's permitted eitzel hedget, you can buy salad with it. And yet in the Beis HaMikdash we're saying it's osur bein bitalush bein b'mechuber. Well then alachas kama v'chama. Well then certainly by Avodah Zarah, which is osur even bitalush, anything that was worshipped is going to be osur even if it's not connected to the ground. Certainly then in the Beis HaMikdash, I don't care if it's connected to the ground, I don't care if it's not connected to the ground, I don't care what it is, it's going to be osur. Let's read it again inside. Omar Rava says, Rava Kavachomer, my esnon, when it comes to a harlot's wage, shemuter b'talush lehedget, that for regular people to buy salad with, it's permitted. Osur b'mechuber legavo. But when we're talking about the Beis Hamikdash, it's osur. I don't care if it's connected to the earth or not. Tichsiv lo sovi esnan zonu mechir kelev. Do not bring to the Beis Hamikdash esnan zonu mechir kelev. I think that's basically if you sell a dog, that money. Lo shna talush v'lo shna b'mechuber. I don't care if it's disconnected, connected. I don't care what it is. So therefore, ne'evad, when it comes to something that was worshipped as Avodah Zarah, she osur b'talush, which is forbidden b'talush, the hedget to regular people, the Avodah Zarah. Eino din she osur b'mechuber legavo. Certainly then it should be osur for use in the Beis Hamikdash. And to answer Rami Bar Chama's question, a mountain that was worshipped as Avodah Zarah, its stones should be osur, even though they're connected to the ground, even though the mountain is connected to the ground, its stones are osur for use in the Beis Hamikdash. Omar lei, Rav Huna Breda of Yeshua l'Rav. However, Rav Huna Breda of Yeshua suggests the opposite. Rav Huna Breda of Yeshua suggests the opposite. Rav Huna Breda of Yeshua points out actually that it didn't specifically say in the Torah that the harlot's wage is also in the Beis Hamikdash b'mechuber. The Torah did not specifically say that the harlot's wage is also in the Beis Hamikdash b'mechuber. We wanted to darshan that it's also bein b'talush bein b'mechuber. And based on that, we wanted to say that the mountain, that by Avodah Zarah, even mechuber is also in the Beis Hamikdash, since by Esn and Zona it's also in the Beis Hamikdash. However, Rav Huna Breda of Yeshua wants to suggest the opposite. It doesn't specifically say that mechuber is also by Esn and Zona in the Beis Hamikdash. And also, we don't know that to be the case by Avodah Zarah either. That's what we're trying to figure out. Rav Huna Breda of Yeshua wants to argue that actually, when the mountain is worshipped as Avodah Zarah, its stones are permitted in the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore, alachas kama v'chama, mechuber should be permitted in the Beis Hamikdash by Esn and Zona. Here we go. Omar le Rav Huna Breda of Yeshua, the Rav Huna Breda of Yeshua says to Rava, O chiluv, I will suggest the opposite. Ma ne'evod, when it comes to Avodah Zarah, she'osur b'talush eitzel hedget, that by regular people, something that is disconnected from the ground, or something that is movable, if it's worshipped as Avodah Zarah, it's also, for regular people, it's also about no. And yet, mutter b'mechuber legavo. But Rav Huna Breda of Yeshua wants to argue that it should be mutter in the Beis Hamikdash. That's exactly what we're trying to figure out. So Rav Huna Breda of Yeshua suggests we have no indication that mechuber, that the mountain, the stones of the mountain should be also in the Beis Hamikdash. Rav Huna Breda of Yeshua says, let's argue that it's mutter in the Beis Hamikdash. Shneimar Eloheim aleharim v'lo harim Eloheim. That their gods are on the mountains. The mountains themselves are not their gods. Loshna lehedget, v'loshna lekavo. When it comes to a mountain, I don't care for regular people. I don't care for Hashem. It makes no difference. They are mutter. When it comes to mountain, it's mutter. Esnon, and therefore I'll make the argument that Esnon, which is more lenient, shem mutter b'talush lehedget, that unlike Avodah Zarah, it is permitted for regular people when it's money, for example, you could buy salad with it. Well, then certainly enu din shemuter b'mechuber legavo, that it should be permitted in the Beis Hamikdash when it is connected to the ground. V'mishum beis Hashem elokecha, and if you're saying, but what about the fact that it says losavi esn zon mechikele beis Hashem elokecha, that even when it's a bias, even when it's a house, it should be also to Hashem? No, that's needed for something else. It's needed for like the following brisa: beis Hashem elokecha prad lepare shenaba labayis divrei Rabbi Eliezer. That beisa from beis Hashem elokecha, we say that if a harlot receives a para aduma as her wage, she may bring it. It may be used as a para aduma because it's beis Hashem elokecha. It's something that is brought into the Beis Hamikdash, but the para aduma is slaughtered on harazesim. So therefore, we learn from beis Hashem elokecha that a harlot's wage, if it was a para aduma, it can still be used. V'chacham lirabos es harikuim. The Chacham say that Beis Hashem Elokecha comes to include that gold from a harlot cannot be used to plate the Kodesh HaKadoshim, to include that. But Rav Huna Bar Yeshua wants to argue that the mountain, the stones from this mountain should be usable in the Beis HaMikdash. Omar le, and Rava responds to Rav Huna Bar Yeshua. He says, look, this Kal V'chomer can go either way. This Kal V'chomer can go either way. I was, right, because you're right? These things aren't definitive, right? Can a harlot's wage that's connected to the ground that cannot be brought to the Beis HaMikdash? Can a mountain that was worshipped for Avodah Zarah, can its stones be used to build a mizbeach? We don't know. We're trying to figure out. So the Kal V'chomer can go either way. I took the Kal V'chomer stringently. You took the Kal V'chomer leniently, but says Rava, Kula v'chomer l'chomer parchinon. When we have a scenario like this, where there's no indication if it's lenient, if it's stringent, it's a coin toss. Well, in that case, we don't have, even though of course we prefer quaried adif, but here there's no indication. There's nothing to rely upon to say that we should be lenient here, right? It's just as well that we should be lenient as we should be stringent. So we have to be stringent. There's no reason, there's no argument to be made that we should be going lenient here, so we have to go stringent. They're popular Rava, but then our Papa says to Rava, I feel like I didn't explain that so well, but basically we have a Kal V'chomer, we can go stringent or lenient. We have to be stringent. What do you want me to tell you? We can't just be lenient. You have no reason to be lenient. Nothing to rely on to be lenient. Amar le Rav Papa, the Rava says Rav Papa to Rava, v'cholecha the ikar kula v'chumra the kula lo parchina. Says Rav Papa to Rava, is that really the case? That whenever we can go either lenient or stringent, we don't go lenient? V'azoya de Pesach. What about when the Korban Pesach is on Shabbos? What about when when Pesach falls out on a Sunday? Which means that the Korban Pesach is offered on Shabbos. And the shaila is, what if you have somebody who the previous, or I guess maybe the previous Sunday, became Tamei Meis, which means that he is Tamei for 7 days, and on day 3 and day 7 he gets sprinkled with the Mei Parah Adumah, which means that the day of his sprinkling, of his final sprinkling, is on Shabbos. And in order for him to be able to partake in the Korban Pesach and Motzoi Shabbos at the Seder, he's going to have to get his Hadzoas Shvi, his sprinkling on day 7, would be on Shabbos. And the shaila is that Doche Shabbos, and then he's going to be chayiv for the Korban Pesach or not? And so Machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer says, well, look, Kal V'chomer, well, all the horns and singing and everything's telling me that it's Shabbos, but we're going to go weiter. I have 40 minutes until then. So Rabbi Eliezer says, look, it's Shabbos and we can slaughter an animal. Shechita is a malacha. There's also midoraisa on Shabbos, and yet we can slaughter these animals, the Korban Pesach on Shabbos. Certainly, sprinkling azaz paraduma, azaz mechatos, which is only also because of a shvus, certainly that would be allowed, and therefore we would do azaz mechatos, and this fellow would be chayav to bring a Korban Pesach, and that's l'chumra. He's chayav to bring a Korban Pesach. Whereas Rabbi Akiva argues, and we're going to see that he doesn't actually believe this way. We'll see why he says this, but Rabbi Akiva is making the opposite argument, which is to be lenient and say that actually will say that the azaz shvi, that the mechatas is not Doche Shabbos, and therefore if the mechatas is, which is only a shvus, is not Doche Shabbos, certainly then Shechita's Korban Pesach would not be Doche Shabbos. Rabbi Akiva doesn't actually believe that, because Shechita's Korban Pesach would be Doche Shabbos. But anyways, but Rabbi Akiva is saying that Hazah Shvi is not Doche Shabbos, would not be Doche Shabbos, and therefore since it's not Doche Shabbos, this fellow is potter from bringing the Korban Pesach, so therefore he's going lenient. So we see that Rabbi Akiva, when he could have gone either way, he could have said that Hazah Shvi, he could have used the Rabbi Eliezer's Kal V'chomer to say Hazah Shvi is doche Shabbos, and therefore he's chayiv to bring the Korban Pesach, but he goes in the opposite, and he says he's potter for bringing the Korban Pesach. So Rav Papa brings this as an example of that when you can go either lenient or stringent, you can go lenient, as Rabbi Akiva went lenient. So again, Amalei Rav Papa leRav, Rav Papa says to Rav, Choleicha deika kula v'chumra. Whenever I can either go lenient or stringent. The kula lo parchinim, we don't go lenient. V'hazoah de Pesach. But what about the hazoas mechatos when the Korban Pesach is offered on Shabbos, because Pesach, the first day of Pesach is Sunday, the pliga Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Akiva, that it's a machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer sovar l'chumra. Rabbi Eliezer says it's l'chumra of a kamechayiv le'legavra, and he's mechayiv the fellow that he has to have mechatos, and he has to purify himself and bring the Korban Pesach. Rabbi Akiva l'kula ufater. And Rabbi Akiva is going l'kula and saying, no, he doesn't have to bring, he doesn't have the mechatos, he doesn't have to bring the Korban Pesach. The kapar Rabbi Akiva l'kula, so we see Rabbi Akiva is going lenient and he doesn't have to bring the Korban Pesach. The Tnan Heishiv Rabbi Akiva, that Rabbi Akiva responded to Rabbi Eliezer and says, Ochiluf, I'll offer the opposite. Umahazah Shahi Mishum Shvus Eino Doche Shabbos. I'll say that the mechatos would not be Doche Shabbos, and Shchita Shidoraisa Lo Koshikin, certainly then Shchita's Korban Pesach would not be Doche Shabbos. And therefore, we see that when Rabbi Akiva was faced with the option of going lenient or stringent, he went lenient, even though it could have gone either way. So answers the Gemara, Hasam Rabbi Eliezer, Gomrei v'Aikar Talmuda. No, there Rabbi Akiva wasn't actually going stringent, wasn't actually going lenient. So I'm going a little quickly because I do have to run for Shabbos, but we're at the end over here. Rabbi Akiva wasn't actually just going lenient when it could have gone either way. Actually, Rabbi Akiva found himself in a difficult position. What was the difficult position? That his Rebbe, Rabbi Eliezer, had actually ruled in the past that Mei Paraduma Mechatas would not be Doche Shabbos. But now Rabbi Eliezer was saying it was Doche Shabbos, and Rabbi Akiva realized that Rabbi Eliezer just simply forgot, and he didn't know how to let Rabbi Eliezer know. He didn't want to simply say, but you had said in the past the opposite. He didn't want to say that. He felt that wouldn't be respectful. So he was trying to kind of nudge Rabbi Eliezer into saying aha by suggesting sort of that maybe Mechatas is not Doche Shabbos. And hopefully Rabbi Eliezer would have stopped for a second and say, Taka, you're right. So that's what happened. Hashem Rabbi Eliezer Gamrei, that Rabbi Eliezer actually had learned, like Rabbi Akiva was saying, at least vis-a-vis the Mechatas, that it is not Doche Shabbos. V'Aikar Talmuda, but Rabbi Eliezer had forgotten about that. V'also Rabbi Akiva lad quaried, Rabbi Akiva was trying to remind him, to which that's why Rabbi Akiva was pleading with Rabbi Eliezer and saying, please don't tachpireni, I don't know how to say it, don't disparage me, I don't know if that's the right word, but during the time of this din, of this argument, kach mekubal ani mimcha, I received this from you, hazah shvus, that even though hazah is only also midrabanan, ve'ena doches Shabbos, it would not be doche Shabbos. So we see it wasn't simply that Rabbi Akiva was deciding, I'm going to go lenient instead of stringent. There was more context there. Rabbi Akiva was actually just trying to nudge Rabbi Eliezer to remind him that actually when it comes to Azaz Mechatas, not Shchitas Korban Pesach being Doche Shabbos, Shchitas Korban Pesach is Doche Shabbos. When it comes to Azaz Chatas, Mechatas, he was nudging Rabbi Eliezer to try to remind him that Rabbi Eliezer actually felt that it would not be Doche Shabbos. Okay, that was the Memvav of Masechta Avodah Zarah. We learned about stones that got disconnected from the mountain. We saw machlokes between the Bnei Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shmuel about would those, they got disconnected on their own from the mountain, would they be osir or would they be mutter? And then we got into the question about a mountain that's been worshipped as Avodah Zarah, even though it's mutter lehedjit, what about to be used for the Avnei Mizbeach, for the Beis HaMikdash? We saw, can you say, maybe you could say machlokes, Rava and Rav Huna bar Rishur, at least different ways of trying to make their arguments. And it seems like Rava's opinion was to be machmir here. So that's probably what we do. Chevre, that was not Memvav of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.